Does anyone here believe that your life can be changed by one single event? Missouri is the only state in U.S. history that was ever denied statehood, and it was because of slavery. But Missouri became a state in 1821, and we entered the Union as a slave state. To compromise for this, we had to allow Maine to enter as a free state, which gave us the 12 free, 12 slave state balance. But by 1854, the Missouri Compromise was overturned by the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Essentially, this allowed people now the chance to decide and vote whether or not they wanted the state of Kansas to be free or slave. So all the citizens who wanted Kansas to be a free state moved to Kansas and started to vote. All the citizens who wanted Kansas to be a slave state moved to Kansas and started to vote. This did not go over well. Both sides clashed. It led to riots, violence. It only escalated racism. And it led to the Missouri-Kansas border wars, where myself and my commanding officer, Captain Nathaniel Line, were sent. We were sent there to suppress the violence, but the violence couldn't be suppressed. In fact, it couldn't be stopped. And by 1861, President Lincoln knew that war was imminent. He understood the importance of securing all the federal arsenals throughout all the cities and all the states. See, if we secured the arsenals, then if war did break out, all the supplies, ammunition, and weapons would already be in federal hands. But life rarely goes the way you plan it. The Baton Rouge arsenal was hit, and Jefferson Davis himself had a hand in that. Fort Sumter was a battle over an arsenal. The South gained control of that too. The Liberty, Missouri arsenal was hit. The Confederacy had their hands on that and their eyes on the next target, the arsenal in St. Louis, with over 60,000 muskets, 1,500,000 rounds of ammunition, tons of powder, cannons. Anything and everything you wanted to start a war or end it was in the St. Louis arsenal. More than enough to take control of the entire city. And President Lincoln knew this couldn't happen. So the president asked his advisors what to do. One of them, Montgomery Blair, suggested that he send Captain Nathaniel Line from the border wars to take control of it. Captain Line was a career-driven military man, and he would do whatever the president asked. They also advised Mr. Lincoln to write Governor Claiborne Jackson of Missouri and ask him to hold the arsenal for us until federal troops arrive. And he certainly got a response. President Lincoln wrote Governor Claiborne Jackson and asked him to rally troops and hold the arsenal for us until we arrive. And Claiborne Jackson told Mr. Lincoln, "It's unlawful and unnecessary for you to ask me to rally troops. And furthermore, I will not be a part of Lincoln's army or Lincoln's war." So the President of the United States just got told by the governor of Missouri to go fly a kite. But the President and the War Department already knew that Jefferson Davis himself, General Frost of Camp Jackson, Governor Claiborne Jackson, and Major Bell of the St. Louis Arsenal were already conspiring to take this over. So this angered response was only proof of that. Jefferson Davis had stolen weapons from the Baton Rouge Arsenal. He had stolen howitzers and cannons. He puts these howitzers and cannons inside crates, disguised as marble crates, decorative marble crates, and sent them to Camp Jackson for General Frost. Great idea. Marble's very heavy, cannons are very heavy. They could go undetected. And since Jefferson Davis was stationed at Jefferson Barracks for 2 years, he knew the St. Louis Arsenal. He knew the landscape, and he knew precisely where to place these howitzers and cannons to best breach the walls of the arsenal. They had a backup. If this conspiracy did not work out, Major Bell of the St. Louis Arsenal told Jefferson Davis himself, General Frost of Camp Jackson, and Governor Claiborne Jackson that anything and everything inside the St. Louis Arsenal would be handed over to them, and all they had to do was name it. All the supplies, ammunition, and weapons General Frost would gladly give and surrender to the Confederacy. Major Bell was a Union officer. He wore the same uniform that I have on. And he was willing to commit treason against the Union and President Lincoln. I never understood that. And so in the spring of 1861, myself and my commanding officer, Captain Nathaniel Line, and I were sent to the Arsenal in St. Louis. Now it's important to realize something. At the time of Camp Jackson, I was a lieutenant. Captain Line was the ranking officer in charge. Captain Line was underseating Major Bell. So here you have an officer of a higher rank, Major Bell, being relieved by an officer of a lower grade, Captain Lyon. This was unorthodox. This never happened. And it was meant to prove a point and a slap in the face. If you wear the Union blue, you better be loyal. Imagine a high school student walking up to his teacher and telling them to go home. They will teach the class. It's that much of an insult. So, with Major Bell relieved of the arsenal and the Union Army forever, we handed out 9,000 muskets to the 9,000 German and Irish volunteer troops. And in a brilliant move by Captain Lyon, all the rest of the ammunition, weapons, and supplies were sent on a steamship to Alton, Illinois, well out of the way. This way, if the walls of the arsenal were breached, there'd be nothing left. The South would have empty hands. Captain Lyon also wanted to make sure that his suspicions about Camp Jackson were correct. And between myself and the captain, there's an 8-inch difference in height. So Captain Lyon, at 5.5 feet tall, fire red hair and a fire red beard, puts on a woman's dress, a woman's shoes, a black veil, and crawls into a carriage. He surveys Camp Jackson, and what he sees are all 800 of General Frost's troops mustering or drilling. They're preparing for a war. But more importantly, he saw just a few feet in front of him the decorative marble crates, the very crates Jefferson Davis himself spoke about. He now had all the proof he needed, and he let the local authorities know. They were overjoyed. They said, "This is exactly what we need." Everyone in Camp Jackson, including General Frost, is in possession of stolen federal property. They can serve federal prison terms if we try them in federal court. And they encouraged the captain to take this to the courts. But Captain Lyon was wise to the legal system. He knew a court trial could take 6 months. This could be over in 6 days or 6 hours. So against their advice, he decided he would march on Camp Jackson the very next day. And why not? We had the backing of the War Department and President Lincoln. And so, in the early morning hours of May 10, 1861, we began our descent on Camp Jackson. Most of the citizens of St. Louis were wide awake with anticipation, and those who weren't were by the time we began our march. Because the sound of 10,000 footsteps outside your front door is difficult to ignore. Literally, if you were less than 100 feet from us, the ground beneath your feet shook. Imagine a parade of elephants walking across your front lawn. So on the streets of Market, Choteau, Spruce, Pine, Broadway, the streets that still exist today, we decided to march. And I was in for a bit of a surprise with St. Louis, Missouri. In my entire career in this war, I've never seen a city more vocal, more political, or more divided than Missouri. Everyone in Missouri had an opinion, and they were more than likely to, and willing to share this opinion. How many of you here know someone? Possibly you're related to that someone. Possibly that someone is sitting next to you right now. But how many of you know someone that anytime you see them, whenever you see them, you don't ask for it, you don't want it, but they love to give you their opinion. They love to tell you their opinion. Well, in 1861, opinions can get you killed. And so every street that we crossed, every avenue we approached, we never knew what lay in wait. The first street we crossed, ladies were blowing us kisses, waving handkerchiefs and flags, singing our praises. Men, young boys as young as 9, 10 years old, would grab pitchforks, rakes, rifles, shotguns, whatever they could to march alongside of us and help us drive out the conspirators of Camp Jackson. But not everyone wanted to help us drive out the conspirators of Camp Jackson. The very next street was something entirely different. People were screaming at us. Everyone was chanting in unison, "Hooray for Jeff Davis!" One woman ran up to 2 of my men and spit right in their faces. The same woman screamed obscenities in my ear so loud it rang for 15 minutes after she left. She screamed obscenities I will not repeat. Obscenities that should never ever come from a person's mouth. And, just as we thought it couldn't get worse, from the second and third story balconies, men and women alike would come out with their bedpans and chamber pots full of the muck and the filth that is feces and urine. I will never forget that sound. It sounded like big buckets of sloshing oatmeal above our heads. But it wasn't oatmeal. They would dump this. If you had a hat that day, you were lucky. I wasn't wearing a hat that day. They would dump this. It would land on our hats or our hair, seep into our eyes, our beards, and soak throughout our uniforms. Several of my men cried out in pain because urine stings the eyes like acid, a sensation no one should ever have to endure. And friends, the most important thing I will say all day is this. All 10,000 of us had guns. All of us had guns. My men, and keep in mind, most of these men were like you. They were civilians. They were bankers, they were doctors, they were shopkeepers, they were farmers, they were fishermen. They were civilians. Only a few of us were military. My men had guns, and they did nothing to retaliate. You think about that. My men who were spat upon, cursed, and ridiculed, had feces thrown in their face, urine splashed in their eyes, on their clothes. My men had the restraint to do nothing. How many of you here, with a loaded gun in your hand, if someone is spitting in your face, screaming at you, throwing urine in your eyes and feces down your back, how many of you, justified and with a loaded gun, would have the restraint to do nothing? I could not have been more proud of my men that day. As we continued on, we were approached by a messenger who had a note for Captain Lyon. Captain Lyon was in no mood to read it, so he pressed on. The messenger was right in front of me, so I grabbed the note. The note was from General Frost. He asked the captain what he intended to do with the St. Louis arsenal. And he wanted to let him know that he has no intentions of doing anything harmful to us or anything regarding the arsenal. It's a good thing that Captain Lyon did not read these lies. It would have only made him angrier. And as we approach Olive Boulevard, people are coming out in droves by the hundreds. They're coming out on carts, buggies, wagons, you name it. Some women grabbing children 4 and 5 by the hand. Some ladies coming out with babies still nursing. Every able-bodied citizen would help the elderly from their rocking chairs and place them in the heart of us. Everyone came out to see this fight. If there was a battle, if there was bloodshed, they wanted to see it. And not from the safety of their homes. They placed themselves in the heart of chaos, in the middle of it, knowing full well they themselves could be casualties. But it didn't seem to matter. They were thirsty for blood. They would stop at nothing to see it. Little did they know they would get exactly what they wished for. As we approached Camp Jackson, we can smell the campfires and the fresh aroma of coffee. They're waiting for us. They knew we were coming and they were waiting for us. And as we engulf their camp, we're staring at them, all 800 of them, with muskets primed and ready for a war. And as we surround them, they're staring back at us, all of us, all 10,000 of us, with bayonets fixed and glittering in the afternoon sun. Captain Lyon now sends a note to General Frost. He tells the general that he's aware of the correspondence with Jefferson Davis. He knows exactly what he intended to do with the arsenal. And he's aware of what's in those marble crates, those disguised marble crates. And he gives him 30 minutes to surrender unconditionally. For those of you unfamiliar with unconditional surrender, it's total surrender. It's like giving your enemy a blank piece of paper. You sign the paper and hand it over to your enemy blank, and they fill in whatever they want. And Captain Lyon wanted nothing less than total surrender. Just about that time, those men of mine who were backed up against Olive Boulevard know exactly how volatile the situation's about to become. There's a mob forming, an angry mob forming, and they're ready to riot. They are pushing and shoving my men. I tell my men to stand their ground, so they shove back the civilians. And the civilians, who were being less than civil that day, shove and push back my men. So on Olive Boulevard, you see this angry wave of people pushing, yelling, screaming, cussing, taunting. It was like a powder keg on a lake of fire, ready to ignite. In that instant, Captain Line received a response from General Frost. The general says he knows nothing about the correspondence to Jefferson Davis. He never intended any ill will against the arsenal. And he knows nothing about marble crates or howitzers or cannons. And he asks us to simply stand down. He asked all 10,000 of us to simply stand down. That wasn't going to happen. Captain Lyons said that the general has wasted 20 minutes of his time. He now has 10 minutes left to surrender unconditionally, or we open fire. And I would never, ever, ever in 1,000 years guessed what would have happened next. We gave the note to the messenger, and he walked it down to his superior. And from where we could see, even that far away, we knew exactly what they were going to do. All 800 of General Frost's troops moved row by row, one by one, with their muskets shouldered. They took their muskets in both hands and stacked arms. They had stacked arms. They had given up or stacked arms. Stacking arms is an old-fashioned way of saying they gave up. When you stack your arms, imagine a Native American teepee. Take away the canvas, you see all the poles resting against one another, but balanced. When you stack arms, you stack them outside of your tent. That way you're always ready to go grab your gun. It's always in a circle. It's always in plain view. The same way, if you stack your arms at a distance, the enemy can see that if you're giving up, it's very clear because all of your guns are stacked neatly away from you. Once we saw this and they gave up, we knew we had doused this Southern conspiracy and didn't fire a single shot at the enemy. And Captain Line ordered us not to cheer, not to gloat this victory. As he came down from his horse, a very unfortunate thing happened. The captain was borrowing a horse that day, and as soon as he stepped down, he was kicked square in the chest by his mount. This knocked him out for 45 minutes. Yes, our captain is asleep. And who knows what would happen if the enemy that just surrendered to us, if they found out that Captain Line wasn't even awake, or those people who were about ready to riot, who knows what they would do? We had to stall for 45 minutes, a long 45 minutes. Thankfully we did. Captain Line comes to. He tells us to place the prisoners in between our flanks, Union men on the left, Union men on the right, and the prisoners marched in between us so we can watch them and protect them as we head back to the arsenal. The group I mentioned before that was ready to riot, now they're brandishing weapons. Muskets, shotguns, pistols. And they had an endless supply of bricks and rocks. There was a man walking behind me with his son who could have been more than 10 or 11 years old. I turned to this man and told him to get down or get away because I wasn't sure what the crowd was capable of. In that moment, he laid his son down on the ground. He laid on top of his boy. And at that moment, a shot rang out. But just like Fort Sumter, we're not certain who fired the first shot. But I can tell everyone here with absolute certainty who fired the second shot. I did. A volley of shots goes into my men, and a volley of shots is returned. And when it's said and done, moments later the smoke clears, and 30 people are dead. Most of them civilians, including an infant in her mother's arms. This woman brought her baby into the crowd because she wanted to see blood. She took this baby out from her crib, out from her room, out of the house, onto the porch, into the street, into the midst of us, because she wanted to see blood. It didn't matter if there was shooting or fighting. She wanted to see a fight and didn't choose to protect her baby. I'll never know why, but her baby paid the ultimate price. As we headed back, the man who I spoke to moments ago ran up to me. He shook my hand and thanked me for saving his life and the life of his son. He said if ever he could repay the favor, all I have to do is name it. I would see this man again later during the war. because before he left, he shook my hand and introduced himself to me as William T. Sherman. We took the men back to the arsenal, where they spent the night and were humanely treated. We paroled them the next day. Exactly 3 months to the date of Camp Jackson, May 10th, 1861. Skip forward to August 10th, 1861. The Battle of Wilson's Creek. Captain Lyon became General Lyon, and on the battlefield of Wilson's Creek, August 10th, 1861, General Lyon fought Governor Claiborne Jackson and lost his life. General Lyon became the first general to die in the Civil War, and President Lincoln ordered a time of silence to remember the first fallen general. I'll never forget, I was sitting outside of a dry goods store in Kansas City, and I was reading the newspaper. That's how I got the news. And a woman approached me, and she asked me a question I'll never forget. And I gave her a response I promise she won't forget. She asked me if I regret being there at Camp Jackson that day. If I regret serving under Captain Lyon. If I regret the death of that baby. If I regret serving Abraham Lincoln. My answer is this. What I regret is the fact that anyone has to die needlessly. Why this woman decided to bring her child out into the heart of chaos, only she can decide. But her baby paid the ultimate price. I shudder to think what would happen if we didn't show up. If the South gained control of the arsenal in St. Louis and then Missouri. Would all 8 states surrounding Missouri be infected by Southern cancer? Would we now have an entire nation full of slave states, full of Confederates, full of slaves? Would you want that? I wouldn't want that. I guarantee most of America wouldn't want that. So I was proud to be there. I was proud to be under Captain Lyon that day. I was proud to serve in the U.S. infantry. And I'm proud to be a major in the U.S. Army. And I'm proud to serve under the greatest commander-in-chief I have ever known, President Abraham Lincoln, who reminds me every day that I grab a gun, every day I set foot on the battlefield, that freedom is not free, and that it's my job to protect each and every one of you here, and keep these United States of America united. Thank you for your time.